Good morning, everybody, and welcome to your webinar today. My name's Anna, and I'm going to be your host for the day. Just before we start, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about the Curve Group. So the Curve Group are a HR and recruitment specialist company, and we have various solutions that actually cover all of the employee life cycle. We work with a number of clients across various industries, from financial services, energy providers, background screening, and technology, just to name a few. We're a multi-award winning organisation as well, so I'm delighted to say that we've won a number of trophies that sit very proudly in our trophy cabinet. As I said, I'm your host today. The overall session will take around 30 minutes, and then we'll leave time for questions and answers at the end as well. If you do want to ask us any questions as we go along, then please do use the chat facility, which can be found in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Just ensure that it's set to all participants. In addition to that, what I'd like to do is just introduce you to your host today. So we have got Caroline Harper, who's our Head of Employee Relations, and Laura Burden, who is our Employee Relations Advisor. So without any further ado, what I'd like to do is hand over to Caroline. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. So what's coming up? So we're going to go through what is a contract of employment, express and implied terms, what should be included in the written statement. We're going to talk about the April 2020 Good Work Plan, how to vary employment contracts, what are HR policies and why do we need them, policies which are required by law and are the recommended policies by us. We're going to go through a case study, talk about company culture, introducing and reviewing HR policies, and there will also be a few minutes for some questions and answers at the end. I'll hand over to my colleague Laura.
Okay, so we're going to start off by looking at employment contracts. So first of all, what is a contract of employment? So a contract of employment is a legally binding agreement between an employer and an employee. Employment contracts consist of a mixture of expressed and implied terms. By law, the employment contract is broader than just the written terms. So, for example, employment law is part of an employee's contract, but usually the law won't be written in full in the document. Let's take a look at expressed and implied terms in a little more detail. Expressed terms are terms recorded in a written contract or openly expressed in an oral contract at the time the contract is made. There may be a combination of written and oral expressed terms. Written express terms aren't restricted to written employment contracts, but can include a number of the organisation's other documents. So an example of this would be your employee handbook, unless, of course, the provisions are deemed not to have a contractual effect. All employees, and since the 6th of April, all workers too, have a statutory right to a written statement of particulars of employment setting out certain key employment terms on their first day of work. Before drafting express terms, it's really important that you're familiar with relevant law. This includes employee status, rules governing written particulars, equal pay and the minimum wage, fixed term and part-time work, flexible working, parental leave and working hours. The express terms must comply with any minimum legal standards, such as the right to paid holidays and the right to daily and weekly rest breaks as well. Implied terms are terms which aren't necessarily set out in writing or which have been agreed orally, but they will nevertheless form part of the agreement between the employer and the employee. So a few examples of this would be agreements with trade unions recognised by the employer, agreements with the whole workforce covering issues such as break entitlements. It could also be something which is so obvious that the terms assume to have been implied. So an example here would be rotas, which have been ongoing for a certain period of time without any changes. We've given you a few examples of terms that are implied into a contract of employment, and you can see these on the slide. So these are a duty of mutual trust and confidence between the employer and employee, the employer's duty to provide a safe system of work and safe workplace, Also implied by statute, so required by law, there's the right to receive at least the national minimum wage or living wage, the right to a minimum period of notice, and equality relating to men and women's pay. So as we've already covered, a contract of employment is a legally binding agreement between an employer and an employee. But do you actually have to provide a written contract? So many contracts are a mixture of written and oral terms. It is, of course, best practice to have a written contract, and most employers do, but it isn't actually compulsory for employees to have their entire contract in written form. To be binding enforceable agreements under contract law, contracts of employment don't have to be in writing, but legally under Section 1 of the Employment Rights Act 1996 and following an employment law update in April 2020, there are certain particulars which have to be put in writing either on or before the first day of employment. The written statement of particulars advises the employee of the most important aspects of the terms of employment. Also important to know is that there isn't a small employer exclusion in relation to this requirement. Employers will normally satisfy the obligation for a written statement of employment particulars by providing an employment contract which includes the necessary details. From April 2020, the statutory requirements changed and additional information must now be provided. We are going to come on to this shortly. But this duty also now applies to all workers and not just employees. So employers must adjust their precedent agreements to make sure they're compliant with the current rules. The strict legal position is that statutory written statements of particulars isn't itself in a contract, but it is certainly evidence of it. The fact that the employer asserts that this statement properly reflects the contractual terms isn't the final decision on what the terms of the contract are, so the employee may still disagree with this. So the slide that you can see now, this details the items which need to be included in a written statement. I'm not going to go through and read all of these now. You can see them on screen and they are going to be emailed out to everybody following the webinar. I am, however, going to talk about one of the areas which we've received a lot of questions and provided a lot of advice on over the last few months. Many businesses, of course, have been severely affected by the coronavirus situation and have had to look at temporary measures in order to protect the workforce and business. Whilst, of course, the government introduced the furlough scheme, this has been made more flexible and extended. We don't know for sure how long this is going to last. Layoffs are likely to be considered as a temporary measure by some employers. But layoffs can only actually be done if there's an appropriate clause in an employee's contract. Any attempts made by employers to impose layoffs without consent and without the contractual right to do so are likely to face claims for breach of contract, unlawful deductions, and constructive unfair dismissal as well. In addition to this, there's clearly also been a huge rise in the number of employees who are required to work from home. Generally, work location is set out in an individual's contract. Enforcing continued home working is a fundamental change to the employee's contractual terms, and terms should only be changed by mutual agreement. The pandemic, of course, is exceptional, and many employees have been working from home and have agreed to this change. But having mobility clauses in your contract will allow you to make changes to an employee's work location, usually after consultation, but it is worth checking your contract templates carefully just to make sure you've got the flexibility that you need moving forward. Please do get in touch with us if you need any help with reviewing your current contract templates. In addition to the information on the slide, it is important also just to know that there's more information which legally you will need to supply within 2 months of commencement, and that's either in the written statement or in accompanying documents. So this could be your policies and your handbook as well. And that includes details of any other paid leave, details of sick pay provisions, and details of pensions and pension schemes. So what's the risk of not providing a written statement? So where a written statement isn't provided, there's a number of risks posed, including uncertainty over employment status. It can cause you difficulty resolving any disputes. It could also lead to potential tribunal claims and reputational damage. I think it's quite important to remember as well, you need to think about the appearance that this gives to potential new starters. It could give quite an unprofessional appearance if you're not given a written statement. Looking at a survey which was conducted by CV Library in 2017, actually around 1 in 5 employees have left a job during or at the end of the probationary period. Now, the most common reason given for quitting in this survey was the role not being as expected. And issuing a written statement clearly sets out expectations in the working relationship and will help to make sure new employees know what to expect from their new role. First impressions can have a really lasting impact on career outcomes, and the written statement is one of the first impressions you're going to make on any new starter, especially given that this is likely to be provided before the individual even commences their employment. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline now, who's going to talk to you about the Good Work Plan.
Okay, so the Good Work Plan was published by the government as a result of lengthy consultation in relation to modern working practices in the UK, including increasing reliance on 0 hours contracts and lots of case law demonstrating the confusion over whether staff from Uber drivers to delivery riders should be treated as self-employed or not. So, next slide, please. So on the 6th of April, the rules set out the written statement changed. So the right to a written statement is now a right from day one, so that any new workers after the 6th of April should get a written statement before or on their start date. Prior to the 6th of April, employers had to provide written statements setting out the basic terms of employment to all employees whose employment lasted for more than 1 month. But this had to be provided within 2 months of the start date of their employment. And now this has changed to day one. So written statements must be provided to all workers and not just employees. The right to a written statement of particulars is extended to include workers as well as employees, and current workers can request a written statement including the additional information. So these are the bare minimum requirements primarily to protect employees and workers. Okay, so we've already covered what should be included in the written statement. However, it is worth noting that some of this information was only added to the requirements as part of the Good Work Plan, which is required for additional information given in the contract. So this includes the days of the week the employee is expected to work, whether the days or hours are variable, and if so, on what basis they will be determined, such as a rota, all the benefits provided by the employee, probationary period details including conditions for passing and the duration of that probationary period, and details for training entitlement, for example, what mandatory training is there and training which may not be funded by the employer. Therefore, it's worth checking your contracts as reviews we've done have showed that many contracts are not now legally compliant. So, how do you vary different contracts? So there's 3 options here. So you can agree changes with the employee following a consultation, and obviously they're usually minor changes that are easy to agree with the employee and change. So you can make changes unilaterally, and this is the most risky option. Or option 3, you can terminate a contract with notice and offer re-engagement on the new terms and conditions, and that option is the least risky, but not without risk. So it is probably better to get advice before completing any of these. So, additional points to think about. Any changes made following a TUPE transfer can only be made for an economical, technical or organisational reason, ETO for short. And if it is connected to the transfer, you won't be able to make those changes. So there is no legal requirement for employees to sign their written statement, but it will make it easier for you to rely on any clauses if it has been signed. As an employer, if you want clauses to be non-contractual, this needs to be clearly stated when inserting them in there. You know, for example, otherwise people rely on implied terms and conditions that my colleagues talked about. Certain clauses, such as mobility clauses or restrictive covenants, need to be drawn up with particular care to ensure they can be relied on in the future. If the employee requests a change, and this does need to be given consideration, especially where the employee has at least 26 weeks continuous service, as the flexible working legislation requires this. Another point to note is that there was also increased focus on employers' attempts to vary existing contractual terms as they try to carry on trading following the coronavirus pandemic and the related restrictions. I'll hand over to my colleague.
Okay, so moving on to policies now. So what are HR policies? HR policies are a written source of guidance on how a wide range of issues should be handled within an employing organisation, incorporating a description of principles, rights and responsibilities for managers and employees. So let's have a look at policies in a bit more detail. So why do we need HR policies? So first of all, having HR policies outlines the responsibilities for both the employer and the employee in the working relationship. They provide written guidance, both for employees and managers, on how to handle a range of employment issues. So for managers in particular, this can be a source for basic process guidance. Certain HR policies and procedures are specifically needed to comply with legal requirements. So for example, a written health and safety policy is required for any organisation with 5 or more employees. There's also important legislative provisions surrounding the setting out of formal disciplinary and grievance procedures, and we are going to come back to this point shortly. They also play an important role in implementing the company's HR strategy. They provide consistency and clarity for all employees and managers. They set expectations from the start of employment. They support a positive company culture. And HR policies can also speed the decision-making process. And this is by making sure there's clear guidance readily available to cover a range of issues. So the HR policies required will vary widely between different companies. And it's really tricky to identify a comprehensive list of HR policies that employers should introduce. There isn't a uniform guide for designing effective HR policies, and the contents of the policies should reflect the company culture. Some companies might find that multiple detailed policies work well, whereas other organisations might find less policies or more principle-based policies work better. What's worked well for other companies or best practice might not work well within your company. So time and attention needs to be given instead on deciding what's going to work to support a successful working relationship between the company and its employees. It might be quite surprising to you that there's actually only 3 policies which are required by law, and these are the health and safety policy, and that's if you've got more than 5 employees, the disciplinary and dismissal policies, and the grievance policy as well. There are various other policies that you might want to consider, so let's have a look at some of these now. So which policies would we recommend? As we've just discussed, the policies we require will vary to the policies required by another company, and the policies that you choose to implement will need to be personalised to suit your business. The list on screen at the moment isn't exhaustive, but these are the main ones we think need to be given consideration, in addition to the ones, of course, which we've just discussed that are required by law. I'm going to pick a couple of these to talk about because unfortunately we don't have time to cover all of them, but don't worry, we'll send you a copy of the slides. So the drug and alcohol policy, first of all, So the use of drug and alcohol during and outside of work hours can present significant safety risks and costs to your business. This could be through injuries, absenteeism, and lost productivity. Having a drug and alcohol policy in place can promote and maintain a risk-free work environment whilst outlining the rights a business has to test employees for drug use. And having worked in warehousing previously, this was one of the main policies needed in place due to it being such a high-risk environment. The most common justifiable reason for processing drug and alcohol test results is, of course, for health and safety reasons. However, in order to be able to do this, you need to make sure this is something which is outlined in your policy. Social media policy next. So social media use is rapidly increasing and it is, of course, becoming incorporated into our working lives. A social media policy is therefore really important to protect your company's reputation, particularly if employees list their place of employment on their profiles, which many people do. On social media, lines between professional and personal networks can become blurred, so it's a good idea to let employees know that how they behave on social media reflects on the business, and also how and if this is going to be regulated. Having this policy in place basically allows you to set out the rules and expectations in relation to social media usage. And when used properly, it will support you to maintain consistency across your workforce, particularly if there's any issues. And this leads nicely on to what Caroline's going to talk to you about.
Okay, so this is a social media case study which can really highlights what can go wrong. So some years ago, Apple released some new emojis which allowed users to change the skin colour of human emojis to better represent human diversity. Unfortunately, Clorox overlooked this fact when the updated picture, so if you look quite closely, there are lots of little emojis and all the skin colours are white. This spiralled on Twitter with people inferring that Clorox was saying they would prefer for all emojis to be white, and the way to do that was to bleach all of the dark-skinned emojis. And this is not the first time a brand has suffered due to social media disaster, really. Social media policies can accomplish a clear set of expectations, reducing any confusion around usage of social media, protect the brand reputation, and increase employee advocacy. So don't forget that this should not just focus on the consequences of any mistakes, but should also be used to encourage employees to be more involved on social media. Coca-Cola's social media policy lays out clear guidelines for 3 distinct groups of people and also provides exact contacts for each point where someone has a question or wants to take action. Dell, differently, has a very simple and straightforward policy with 6 overarching points, which makes it simple and easy to understand. However, could be more specific. For example, one point is, be nice, have fun and connect. This could potentially be clearer. Best Buy has summed up their social media policy with the phrase, protect the brand, protect yourself, and has broken their policy into 2 parts of what you should do and what you shouldn't do. It includes a reminder to employees that they still have a responsibility to follow this guidance when they are not on shift. Remember, your responsibility to Best Buy doesn't end when you're off the clock. For this reason, this policy applies both to company-sponsored social media and personal use as it relates to Best Buy. When developing HR policies and contracts of employment, remember that these set the tone for what your company stands for. There is no one-size-fits-all approach, and a number of factors should be considered while developing or making changes to these, including the size and structure of the business, the workplace climate. For example, a small business with fewer employees will often have friendlier relationships, not just with peers, but with the company's leadership team as well. So policies for these need to be vastly different to the process-orientated policies that larger employers were more likely to implement. They're also very important for fostering a culture of trust, fairness and inclusion by outlining responsibilities and expectations of both the employer and the employee in the working relationship. we've listed some of the policies which can have a really big impact on your company culture. So how does this affect your employee value proposition, EVP? This is the unique set of benefits which an employee receives in return for the skills, capabilities and experience they would bring to a company. An EVP is all about defining the essence of your company. How is it unique and what does it stand for? If a business understands and uses its employee value proposition effectively, it can attract the right talent into the organisation and then retain those people. Once a business understands its EVP, it can make sure that prospective employees recognise what the business could offer them. It could also work to improve the EVP for existing employees by understanding what it is that they value. Employers are looking for more than just a job title. They want a career with good pay and benefits, but equally as important to this is that there is a good cultural fit. People are looking for a work life which will complement their home life, and a flexible working policy is an important contributing factor to the EVP. According to the 2019 Global Talent Trends report produced by LinkedIn, 84% of UK professionals recognise that this helps employees to have a better work-life balance, and 72% agree that it makes their workforce happier. Looking at ways of making the workforce more flexible will help you to attract and retain top talent within your business, and many businesses are looking at innovative ways to retain and attract talent. Flexible working trends which are increasing include the 4-day week, early finishes, remote working and flexible hours. So company culture. The tone used within the policies can really set out the tone of the workplace culture. Should this be friendly, relaxed and informal, or does this need to be more formal, detailed and process-driven? Selecting the policies which are in place is also really important. As we've already covered, there are only few policies which are actually required by law. Which policies will align with your company and what it stands for? It may be that your company chooses to provide very minimal information and that working relationships are largely based on trust. Of course, the content of the policy themselves plays a key part here. For example, do you want a dress and appearance policy detailing what employees can and can't wear? Or is this not of importance to your company? You can spend a lot of time developing the policies, but it's key to remember that they must be demonstrated in the workplace. If they are not followed or referred to, they will of course have no impact, which could cause uncertainty. Policies are of course just one part of a much bigger picture. When policies are developed, it's important to ensure they are aligned with the company mission, vision and values. And finally, they should support with the business and HR strategy. So here is some very basic guidance which is likely to help you introducing and reviewing your HR policies. Assess, audit current practices and what already exists, whether formal or informal. Research and benchmark against other organisations' practice. It would be beneficial to pay particular attention to the organisations in the same sector or location as your own. Consult with staff representatives and or unions. Establish steering groups, working parties to develop the policy. Set realistic timescales. Pilot draft policies. Give specific guidance to managers. Ensure policies are complementary, flexible and practical and enforceable, and avoid too much jargon. This will ensure policies are user-friendly and can be easily understood by all employees. Where technical terms are unavoidable, it may be useful to include a definition section. Including a contact on the policy ensures employees know who to contact should they have any queries. It will also indicate who has the responsibility for updating and reviewing them. Bringing your HR policies to life requires work across the business to make sure that line managers and employees have a full understanding of what the policies are and the expectations, including any updates. The format for communications will depend on the organisational culture and the nature of the policies. And service line managers play a key role in bringing HR policies to life. Training is really important to make sure that managers fully understand the policies and are able to use policies sensitively and fairly. And induction also plays a key role in making sure new employees are aware of policies and procedures within an environment. The maintenance of the policies also needs to be considered. For this, you need to have a continuous review process. The frequency of reviews on policies will vary. For example, some policies may require annual review due to, legislative changes, etc., and employment law coming in. However, others may need just updating in line with your company mission, vision and values. Okay, that's it for the content on the slides. If there's any questions and answers.
If you do have any questions, please do pop them into the chat facility. Just make sure it's set to all participants, and the chat facility can be found in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Okay, Caroline, I can't see any questions coming in at the moment. I'll just give it a couple of more seconds.
If anyone has any that they want to take offline, then obviously our contact details are on the slides.
Okay, I've got no questions coming in at the moment, so I'm going to just move on to conclude our session. So firstly, thank you very much to both Caroline and Laura for today's session. What have we got coming up next? Well, actually, we've got another webinar coming up in January, so it's on January the 27th, and this is all around IR35. So if you do have any contractors within your organisation, then we've got a working party and a working team that are going to be specialising within this area. So please do sign up. We will come out on social media for you, and also what we're looking for is to find out if your business is ready to comply or not. I'm just going to stop there because we have actually had a question come in. So Caroline, I'm just going to open up your mic. We've had a question come in from an individual. With regards to sickness policy, outcomes to sickness and absence meetings, oh, it's just moved my screen. Sickness and absence meetings mirror disciplinary outcomes, e.g. verbal and written warnings to dismissals.
So you mean, well, I would always have a separate capability policy, although it's the same process as a disciplinary often. But yes, it would mirror the same process, because often you wouldn't jump, would you, to a gross misconduct warning, if that answers your question. But I would usually split the two policies up.
Okay, I've got nothing come back in chat. If I need to, I can actually open up that line if it's required. There are no other questions coming in at the moment, so thank you very much. Oh, got a couple coming in now as well. So we've got one question that's coming in, is how often should you review your contract?
Usually in line with legislation or any changes, but I would certainly look. I mean, at the moment, as my colleague said, with changes to people working from home, perhaps wanting to insert layoff clauses, etc., it's probably a good idea to review them now. So really, in answer to that question, it is, with any big pieces of legislation, so I don't know if people have already updated them in line with a good work plan, but that is a major piece of legislation that really does need contract reviewing.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've just had a comeback from our previous participant who's come back and said, great, thank you. So capability should cover sickness as well as performance.
Yes, exactly. So I'd have a capability policy which does cover sickness and performance, and a separate disciplinary policy.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Caroline. That's great. You've had a thanks a million back, so that's great.
Thank you.
Excellent. So we've done some previous webinars in the past as well, and these can all be found on our website. They have all been recorded as well, so you are actually able to watch them. And then finally, helping hand. So this is how can we help you really? So we offer all different kinds of services to you, and as we've already said, we can support you with policies all the way through to everything on the employee life cycle. Our packages do start from £200, but we also offer a very brief kind of pay as you go service as well. So please do reach out to us if there's anything we can do to support you in any way. That does conclude today's session, so thank you all very much for joining. It's been a pleasure having you on board. And once again, thank you to both Caroline and Laura for giving us all of that great advice today. Thank you very much. To leave the session, if you'd like to just click on the File button in the top left-hand corner and click on Leave Session, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much all.